The evacuation of eastern Aleppo finally begins. The sick and wounded are the first to be brought out. Around 200 people are being driven out in ambulances and buses after being trapped for months. More than 1,000 others are expected to be brought out later.
In the history of international relations, it took 4,000 years to build Aleppo, hundreds of generations. One generation managed to tear it down in 4 years.
We'll be getting the latest from our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen. Also on the programme, a Brexit trade deal could take 10 years to negotiate, warns the UK's ambassador to the EU. Britain becomes the first country in the world to allow IVF using 3 people's DNA. New measures to boost social care funding in England. Local authorities will be allowed to increase council tax by up to 6% over 2 years. And Vallegro, the horse on which Britain's Charlotte Dujardin won 3 Olympic golds, retires from competition. He was just the best, she says.
In the south, 100 firefighters tackle a blaze at Fleet Services on the M3. The restaurant block has been severely damaged. And will the green fields of Bishopstoke disappear under 6,000 homes? The council decides tonight.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. After months under siege, the first civilians are being evacuated right now from what's left of rebel-held eastern Aleppo. 200 of the sick and wounded are being brought out in ambulances and buses. The UN says it's hoped well over 1,000 more will be bussed out along a safe corridor to other rebel-held areas in Syria as part of a ceasefire deal mediated by Turkey and Russia. The Red Cross is bringing the first evacuees out. One of the team said she had never seen such levels of human suffering before and that it was hard to believe how people survived. In total, around 30,000 people are still believed to be in eastern Aleppo. Richard Galpin reports.
This is the day it's expected the rebel defeat in Aleppo will be made final. With the ceasefire now back in force, the first to leave this morning were the most critically injured and sick. These Red Cross and Red Crescent ambulances expected to keep rotating in and out throughout the day, some taking patients to Turkey for treatment. This Syrian government minister, Ali Haider, says their goal is to ensure civilians can now leave the area safely. Earlier it seemed the whole deal was unravelling again. An ambulance to the local rescue teams known as the White Helmets coming under heavy fire.
Regime forces shot at us. The ambulance driver was shot while he was still in his vehicle. Some civilians were also seriously wounded. Another colleague was clearing the route for us in a bulldozer. They shot at him and now he's between life and death in the operating table.
Despite this, the evacuation has been going ahead as planned so far. These buses due to take hundreds of rebel fighters and their families out of the tiny enclave of eastern Aleppo still under their control. They're heading to another rebel stronghold nearby. For them, this is a humiliating defeat. The battle for Aleppo was the biggest, bloodiest and possibly most important of the 5-year civil war. The defeat of the rebels here a turning point, the Syrian regime now in a commanding position. And all this only because of the decisive intervention of the Russian military and Shiite militias backed by Iran. With tens of thousands killed and injured in the fighting here, the international community is being condemned for not doing more to help the civilians.
Aleppo, for 3,000 years, gave to world civilization, and world civilization was not there to assist the people of Aleppo when they needed us the most.
And as the evacuation continues, there are still grave concerns about the safety of those now leaving the area and whether the promises that they will not be harmed by pro-government forces will be respected. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, is in Beirut. And Lise, it's been extraordinary watching those pictures of the buses and the ambulances leaving eastern Aleppo. They're expecting to get something like 1,000 people out today.
It's an extraordinary moment, not just for Syria, but for so many around the world whose minds have been concentrated on a truly historic moment. There it is, live on Syrian state television, the columns of green government buses, which the rebel fighters have come to associate with their defeat, are pulling out of what's left of their embattled, besieged enclave in East Aleppo, pulling out to go to an opposition stronghold in northwestern Syria to fight another day. And the commentary on Syrian state television is provided by a commentator who, of course, reflects what is very much the view of the Syrian army, its allies and its supporters, which is that this is a victory against terrorism, a major, major victory, both on the battlefield and both symbolically and strategically, as the battle for Syria's second city truly draws to a close. But it is also a very sad moment, sad, I think, for all of Syria and beyond, because ambulances are also pulling out this morning, taking out the very ill, the very injured, people who've been desperately waiting to get out for months, and only today, when it's all over, can they begin to get the care that they truly deserve, that any humans would deserve.
Lise Doucet in Beirut, thank you. And our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, is with me now. So the battle draws to a close. What now?
Yeah, if there's any kind of the occasional shooting or shelling going on, it's really the death throes of the battle. Well, first of all, for the people who've, not just in this convoy, but those who've already left on foot, however grim it was, at least they were in their homes. Now they join that, more than half the pre-war Syrian population that have lost their homes, have been displaced or ultimately made refugees by the war. And that means losing, family links, jobs, homes, education. Of course, a lot of them haven't had that anyway for a while, but often it gets worse when you have to move. In terms of the war itself, the war isn't over, the war goes on. Rebels still hold some quite considerable swathes of territory. There are also the jihadists of Islamic State. But what we have now is probably an emboldened regime, self-confident, swashbuckling, swaggering allies in Russia and Iran who've scored a sizable victory on behalf of Assad, and those who are on the other side of the argument, anti-Assad, pro-Western, friends of America, friends of Saudi Arabia, have got a lot of hard thinking to do about what they do about Syria in the future.
Jeremy Bowen, our Middle East editor, thank you. The UK's most senior diplomat in Brussels, Sir Ivan Rogers, has privately warned the government that it could take 10 years to negotiate a post-Brexit trade deal with the European Union, and that it could still fail. But Downing Street is playing down his claims. European leaders are gathering in Brussels this lunchtime for the final EU summit this year. Theresa May is there, but only for part of the talks, as she has to leave this afternoon to allow the other leaders to discuss their strategy for Brexit over dinner. Our Brussels correspondent Damien Grammaticus reports.
For the Prime Minister, tricky questions today.
Do you think it could take 10 years to negotiate a trade deal once Britain leaves the EU?
Well, what we'll be discussing at this summit is how we work together to deal with the serious challenges that we face. So we'll be discussing migration.
The reason she's being asked, a few paces behind her, the UK's man in Brussels, Sir Ivan Rogers. His advice to his boss, the BBC has learnt, Brexit could take 10 years to achieve.
We will be leaving the EU. We want that to be as smooth and an orderly process as possible. It's not just in our interest, it's in the interest of the rest of Europe as well. Thank you.
Could it then take 10 years?
And with that, she was off.
What's different about this warning is that it comes from Britain's ambassador here, although such similar warnings have been delivered since well before the referendum that Brexit could take a long time to achieve. What it serves to emphasise is that control of the process lies not with the UK, but with the EU's other countries, something that'll be evident today when they meet to discuss Brexit over dinner, and Theresa May won't be there.
Some countries, like Hungary, are happy to discuss both the UK's exit terms from the EU and what its future trade relationship will be in tandem. Others may want to sort out exit before tackling trade, a far slower process. But nobody wants it drawn out.
10 years, I hope it will be a lot less.
The final deal may only come after the UK is outside the EU. This was the EU's foreign policy chief.
What will you be discussing about Brexit, madam?
That's not foreign policy yet.
And there are urgent foreign policy issues. The head of Eastern Aleppo's local council is addressing this summit, pleading for the safe evacuation of all civilians still there. And EU leaders are trying to preserve their shaky refugee deal with Turkey and keep sanctions on Russia in place until Theresa May triggers Article 50. Brexit isn't top of the EU's priorities. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Brussels.
Our assistant political editor Norman Smith is in Westminster. How seriously are ministers taking these claims from the British ambassador then?
Well, he may be our top man in Brussels, but there's been almost a sort of snort of derision, of contempt at the idea it could take 10 years because ministers say the EU needs a trade deal with us just as much as we need a trade deal with them, so it will be done pronto. And we had a trade minister in the Commons this lunchtime saying, look at the example of the United States. They managed to get a deal with Jordan in just 4 months. And the former Trade Secretary, Peter Lilly, prominent Brexiteer, said to me, you know what, you could get the broad outlines of a trade deal done, bing, bang, bosh, in an afternoon. What ministers think is going on is that Sir Ivan is picking up on warnings from the European Commission, who are trying to put a bit of stick about, trying to make Brexit sound difficult and slow and painful and protracted in order to discourage other EU countries from thinking, aye, we'll try Brexit. In other words, it's to deter them. But they have to hope they're right, because if it does take 10 years, that would mean massive uncertainty for business and potentially a backlash from voters who think, hang on, we voted for Brexit in 2016. How can we still be talking about a final deal in 2026?
Norman Smith in Westminster, thank you. The creation of babies from 3 people has been given the go-ahead in the UK by the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority. Clinics can now apply for a licence to perform the advanced form of IVF. The HFEA must approve every clinic and every patient before the procedure can take place. Our health correspondent James Gallagher is in central London for us now, and it's going to be hugely controversial. Why is it being allowed?
Well, this is not a decision that's been taken lightly. It's a decision a decade in the making. It's complicated science, but it all boils down to a simple point. This is about saving children's lives. Now, children born with mitochondrial disease don't have the energy to keep their bodies running. Their hearts fail. They have learning difficulties because they can't keep their brain going. So what this does is it tries to combat the root cause of the disease. Now, mitochondrial disease is only passed on from mother to child. So this idea about advanced IVF uses a second donor woman's egg in order to prevent these children being born with mitochondrial disease. Now, the decision made by the HFEA today will allow clinics to apply for a license to practice this 3-person IVF technique. Now, what that means is that today, Newcastle University, which has pretty much pioneered this therapy, has said it's delighted by the news and plans to put in a license incredibly quickly. Now, if everything goes to plan, then you can expect maybe the first children to be born towards the end of 2017. So, the first babies could, be implanted in the beginning of next year and then born towards the end of it. Now, how many people could benefit? Well, initially, up to 25 children a year could potentially be benefiting from this procedure.
James, thank you. New measures to boost funding for social care in England have been announced. The government will allow local authorities to increase council tax by up to 6% over 2 years, with a maximum of 3% each year. The government said it will also provide £240 million of extra funding for social care next year. But Labour says the move will lead to higher taxes and poorer public services. Sarah Campbell reports.
Does anyone do boxing?
Caring for our ageing population is expensive and providers are under pressure. At this rehab centre in Liverpool, a halfway house between hospital and home, the demand for beds is unrelenting.
As soon as the patient is discharged home, the referrals coming through and within 2 hours we're supposed to sort of have the beds reallocated.
In Nottingham, Mandy Oliver's job is to sort home care so that people can be discharged from costly hospital beds.
Normally during this time of year the demand's very high anyway. We call that the winter pressures for home care, but really over the last 18 months we've never really gotten out of winter pressures.
Today, the government said savings will provide an extra £240 million for adult social care, and local authorities will be able to increase council tax.
They will need to show how the additional income is spent to support people who need care in their area and how it improves adult social care services. However, it's worth noting that the extra flexibility to raise funding for adult social care next year will add just £1 a month to the average council tax bill.
Councils had previously been allowed to raise council tax by an extra 2% per year for 3 years to boost the Adult Care Fund. Today's announcement means that councils can increase by 3% over 2 years, so a shorter, sharper shock for council taxpayers, but over 3 years, the same overall amount of extra cash. Local councils say what's lacking is a long-term solution.
The demand for care is far outweighing anything we can rise. Secondly, it's pushing all the burden onto our council taxpayers who are least able to pay for it, and it is going to increase the amount of bed blocking in hospitals, which is going to add to the pressure on the health service.
Edna Farley is 84. She knows the value of the care she's received at this rehab centre since she broke her hip.
The people who come here need help, and if they don't get the money, they won't have the people to do the help.
Adult social care is a cost which will continue to rise, and which critics say successive governments have failed to properly address. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
A council which ran care homes in South London has agreed to pay compensation to all the children in the Shirley Oaks homes, whether or not they were abused. The payouts, dating back decades, will cost Lambeth Council tens of millions of pounds, and it's being made because being in the homes meant they were at risk of child abuse. A group representing those abused says its members suffered child abuse on an industrial scale. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
Shirley Oaks was designed as a haven for London's most vulnerable children. The green space, the detached houses, now private flats. Adrian Batley lived here in the 50s, attended the on-site school, was confronted with a drama teacher who he says groped him in class, and then went further.
He called me up, got me undressed, he said, to try on costume, and then he started playing with me, taking it a step further than he was able to do in class.
It happened 3 times. He didn't understand it, and his teacher said he should never discuss it.
Saying something to the effect of, this is what big boys do, and this is our little secret, don't tell anyone else.
Major Adrian Batley, as he became, served his country in a string of conflicts. But he can't forget what happened here.
As time goes on, it's always there. Just keep it in the back of your mind, and it props up every now and again. But I always been of the belief, take a day as it comes and get on with life.
He's among those who've given their stories to the Shirley Oaks Survivors Association, which launched its report today, naming 27 alleged abusers. Working from this office, this group has investigated its own allegations of abuse. It may be accused of lacking independence, but it says it's interviewed 400 witnesses and obtained documents from the police and Lambeth Council. But it will not take part in the National Child Abuse Inquiry.
Have you been able to prove for sure that this sort of abuse happened?
Oh, absolutely. And we did it by individualising the claims and then joining the dots together. So it's clear when you put the amounts of people together and making those allegations, it's clear that it took place.
Today, Lambeth Council revealed it's preparing at least a blanket payment to every former Shirley Oaks child, because all were at risk. It'll cost tens of millions of pounds. Tom Simons, BBC News, Shirley Oaks.
It's the biggest ever data breach. Yahoo has admitted that hackers may have stolen data from more than 1 billion of its customers' accounts in 2013. Names, phone numbers, email addresses and dates of birth were taken, but not bank or payment details. Our technology correspondent Rory Cellan-Jones is here. The scale of this is huge. How will people know if they've been affected, though?
It is extraordinary, the biggest data breach in history. People may know because they get an email. I actually got an email myself this morning about 5:30 in the morning because I used to have a Flickr account, a photo sharing account. And it's important to remember that Yahoo wasn't just an email company, wasn't just a sort of news directory and search company. It had all sorts of other businesses, including Tumblr. And it's also ran email for a while for both BT and Sky, both of those companies. Getting in touch with customers, or at least sending out messages to, if you haven't changed your password since 2013, which is pretty poor practice anyway, you should be doing that. A lot of data out there, unclear how much danger people are in, but if they do have access to your email account in any way, people use their email accounts for all sorts of other things besides the central purpose of Yahoo, then that is dangerous. So that is a concern, and for Yahoo as a business, its reputation was already pretty bad. It's now rock bottom, just as it's trying to sell itself.
Rory Cellan-Jones, thank you. The time is just after 1:20. Our top story this lunchtime. The evacuation of eastern Aleppo finally begins. The sick and wounded, women and children are the first to be brought out. And still to come, Russian firepower proved crucial in the Syrian government's recapturing of Aleppo. We report on how the battle is being viewed in Moscow.
In South Today, we'll be live at the site of the big fire at Fleet Motorway Services. Also, plans to axe this hydrotherapy pool in Berkshire have caused an angry reaction. And a pigeon poser. The Isle of Wight town looking for answers to a messy little problem.
More now on our main story. In the final battle for Aleppo, the support of the Russian military has been key to the success of the Assad government. And that makes the way the civil war is being reported in Russia often very different to the way it is in other parts of the world. Public opinion, too, sees the war in a very different light, as our Moscow correspondent Sarah Rainsford now reports.
On the ground in Syria, Russia's special forces, shown here for the first time on state television. The commentary is all about a heroic fight against terrorists. No mention here of any civilians caught up in the bloodshed. The soldiers identify targets for Russian bombers. For 15 months, those planes have conducted airstrikes that have reversed the fortunes of Bashar al-Assad. Russian firepower has been critical in his troops' recapturing of Aleppo. But it's also why the UN accuses Russia of a complete meltdown of humanity. And yet Vladimir Putin seems immune to such talk. Honouring a Russian soldier killed in the fight for Aleppo, his only condemnation was for those he calls terrorists.
For Russia, the conflict in Syria was always about projecting its power and influence. As the West stalled, Moscow moved in. The message to Russians here that they were helping to protect the world from terrorism. The message to the world that Russia under Vladimir Putin is a political and military power to be reckoned with.
As for brutal bombing campaigns, Russia has done that before. This is not Aleppo, but Grozny in Chechnya, a city flattened in what President Putin also called a war on terror. In this latest conflict, he's faced no calls at home for restraint.
This is a very important, almost final battle. And in the current situation, the winning side will not stop, whatever happens.
But with all the focus on Aleppo, this happened. Russian troops were forced to abandon their positions in Palmyra as militants from ISIS moved in. Recapturing this Syrian city was also once trumpeted by Russia as a great victory. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Moscow.
Some breaking news now, and Rupert Murdoch's 21st Century Fox has reached an agreement to take over the broadcaster Sky for £11.7 billion. Amal Rajan is our media editor. This has just been reported in the last hour.
Yes.
It's not the first time, is it, that Rupert Murdoch has tried to do this?
It's not. I mean, he tried in 2010-11 to buy Sky News. He did that through News Corporation, but this is all about unfinished business. That previous attempt to buy the whole of Sky News that Murdoch attempted 6 years ago was derailed by the phone hacking inquiry, of course, that was a scandal which led to the closure of the News of the World. But a lot has changed in the last 5 years, so this bid is not coming from News Corporation, Sophie, it's coming from 21st Century Fox. There's much more competition in the sector now, and of course Sky's shareholders have agreed in the last hour that they quite like the price that Murdoch is offering. So it's not the first time that Murdoch is going for Sky, and I think the mood music, according to the people I've been speaking to, suggests this time it's going to go through.
And is it a done deal, or and what will it mean for viewers?
Well, it's not a done deal yet, because what Sky have done is that they've got this independent board that have looked at the deal and agreed the price. They've now got to put that to the rest of Sky's shareholders. It's the type of agreement that Murdoch is going for means that 75% of Sky's shareholders have got to approve. We think that's quite likely to happen, but then it could get referred by the Culture Secretary, Karen Bradley, to Ofcom to look at whether or not it's bad for media plurality. In terms of what it means for viewers, in the short term, not much. We think this deal could take a long time. It might not happen for a year. We're not going to see Fox News coming to Britain because news is still very much regulated by Ofcom. And we might, in the end, see a bit more American television if you own a Sky cable. But if you don't, there's not much that's going to change.
Amal Rajan, our media editor. Thank you. An historic budget delivered in challenging economic political times. That's how Scotland's Finance Secretary has described the plans that he will be unveiling to the Scottish Parliament this afternoon. It's Scotland's first budget since new tax powers were handed to Holyrood, and Derek Mackay has the ability to alter all income tax bands and rates paid in Scotland. So what might he do? Our Scotland editor Brian Taylor is at Holyrood for us now. Brian.
I think on taxation, he'll try and achieve a balance. I think he'll leave the standard rates alone. That's certainly what he hopes to do. Of course, he has to win consent from the Parliament behind me, where the SNP are in a minority. I think the big change will be on the higher rate. The Chancellor, you know, is proposing to get the threshold up to £45,000 en route to £50,000. For Scotland, it'll be less than that. That means that if you're earning round about £50,000 in Scotland, you would end up paying £300 more than in England. Not more in absolute terms, but more in relative terms. In terms of other elements, I expect an effort to try and stimulate the economy. Scotland's economy is flatlining, even by comparison with the difficulties being experienced across the UK as a whole. And thirdly, in terms of public spending, I think the focus will be on education. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, has declared that to be her top priority. But I think the Scottish Government will try and channel money directly to schools rather than via local councils, directly to head teachers, although I think they will scrap a plan they had to top slice money from some council tax and distribute that to the poorest areas. Nonetheless, I expect a big focus on money for schools to improve attainment.
Brian Taylor in Edinburgh, thank you. Now, they're one of British sport's most successful partnerships. Vallegro and his rider Charlotte Dujardin won 3 Olympic golds and stole the hearts of millions in the dressage event. But last night, at the age of 14, Vallegro retired from competition at the International Horse Show in London. Our sports correspondent Joe Wilson reports.
In the delicately defined world of dressage, this is horsepower. The concept is to make the most complex movements seem effortless and controlled, to synchronise animal and human. And last night in London, Charlotte Dujardin and Vallegro showed the world how it's done. The best ever dressage combination, now retired from competition.
It's stunning, incredible performance. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Vallegro.
I've wanted to retire him at the top of his game because he owes me absolutely nothing, and now we can take all the pressure off and we can just go around and really, really enjoy ourselves, and he deserves that. So for me, that's what it's most important.
Well, let's face it, Britain started to notice dressage because Britain was suddenly good at it. 2 gold medals at the 2012 Olympics, and Vallegro became one of sport's most valuable assets. 6 million, 20 million. The Saudi royal family would pay almost anything for him. Vallegro stayed to win again in Rio. Owned by Carl Hester, himself an Olympic competitor, who gave Vallegro to Dujardin to ride. He insists he's never regretted it.
He will be talked about, probably still, I think, in 100 years' time. When I look at the horses we're talking about now that were greats, why not? You know, he was a breath of fresh air when he came into the sport, and so was his partnership with Charlotte, because she was so young and new, and the story was so great how she'd worked her way up.
Well, Dujardin's not personally wealthy. She has great ability. Some say she could make any horse pirouette. Well, she was presented with a wooden replica while she tries to find a real replacement for the next Olympics, as she played along. Vallegro remained quietly dignified, imagining the fields now at his disposal. As those who know him well will tell you, he's never been the emotional type. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather now with Stav Danaos. It's so mild out there.
It is, Sophie. It's going to remain mild as well as we head into the weekend for some areas. I'll show you in a moment. A bit benign the weather at the moment is because we're sandwiched in between two areas of low pressure and high pressure. Blocking high over the near continent, low pressure out in the Atlantic. And it's trying to throw weather fronts in our direction, but because of that high pressure, they always remain towards the west. So it means we feed up mild air from the south. A lot of cloud, like this picture depicts in Walton-on-Thames, pretty much across the country. But there is a little bit of brightness around. The satellite picture shows that blanket of cloud, but there's been some sunshine, the far north of Scotland, a bit of hazy sunshine for Northern Ireland, and the far southwest tip of Cornwall, we're seeing some sunshine as well, just poking out there to allow for some sunny spells, those showers never too far away. So we have a lot of cloud this afternoon. Across Scotland, there will be a little bit of patchy rain around, but I think for many places it should stay largely dry. A bit of hill fogs, mist and murk as well. Temperatures range from about 6 to 10 degrees, so it's pretty mild for the time of year. Like I mentioned, the best of the brightness across Orkney in the far north of Scotland. A little bit of brightness for Northern Ireland as well. Temperatures in Belfast, 9 or 10 degrees. And for much of central eastern England, it should stay dry, but really murky, cloudy, limited brightness. And an area of rain stretching up from Dorset through in towards Wales, the West Midlands, will become a bit more extensive through the course of the afternoon, and it will be mild across the south, 11 or 12 degrees. That rain trundles its way northwards, as you can see here, overnight, and leaves a legacy of cloud once again, a little bit of light rain, patchy drizzle, some rain affecting Northern Ireland. Because of the southerly winds and the cloud cover, it's going to be another fairly mild night, 7 to 10 degrees. And for Friday, it's almost a repeat performance. Most of the weather fronts will be out in the west, so some rain for Northern Ireland, potentially western Scotland, which should peter out through the day. But elsewhere, for much of England and Wales, a fairly dry day. There'll be a lot of cloud around, limited sunshine, bit of a sort of boring weather picture. Temperatures around 9 to 12 degrees. And then we start to see a bit of a change into the weekend. High pressure returns in from the continent and settles in across the UK, certainly for England and Wales. But notice the isobars across this northwest corner, low pressure trying to move in, sending some weather fronts as well into Scotland and Northern Ireland. So for England and Wales, because of the high pressure, light winds, mainly dry, quite cloudy as well, and on the coolish side, not quite as mild as it has been. For Scotland and Northern Ireland, it will be windy at times, particularly on Saturday, and very mild, especially on Sunday. Given some sunshine across the northeast, the Murray Coast, we could make 15 or 16 Celsius. So quite a mixed bag into the weekend. Keep tuned to the forecast.
Stav, thank you very much. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. The evacuation of eastern Aleppo finally begins. Women, children and the wounded are the first to be brought out. Almost 1,000 people are understood to have been brought out so far today. Around 30,000 are still trapped inside what's left of the rebel-held part of the city. More on that, of course, throughout the afternoon on the BBC News channel. I'll be back with the BBC News at 6, but now on BBC One, we join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.